When the HOA president showed up at my dock yelling that my boat was an eyesore, I almost laughed. She stood there in her pink tracksuit, barking orders like she owned the lake. What she didn't know was that the lake, every ripple of it, was mine. I bought it years ago when the old fishing lodge went bankrupt. So when she tried to fine me for blocking community access, I decided to teach her a lesson she'd never forget. I didn't argue, didn't even raise my voice. I just let her keep digging her own grave, while I quietly prepared the papers that would evict her precious HOA fishing club for good. When I first moved into Lakeshore Estates, I thought I'd found paradise. The calm blue lake stretched for miles behind my backyard, and my boat, an old but well-kept Cobalt 220, sat proudly at my private dock. I spent early mornings on that water, watching fog drift like silk, fishing in silence or just floating with a cup of coffee in hand. For 5 peaceful years, it was bliss. Then the HOA elected a new president, Pamela Hargrove. Pamela was the kind of woman who could turn a garden club meeting into a war zone. Always dressed like she'd stepped out of a catalog. Pink tracksuits, pearl earrings, sunglasses that probably cost more than my outboard motor. She'd been in the neighborhood less than a year before she started revamping the HOA. That word alone sent chills down every homeowner's spine. Her first order of business? Community uniformity. She started sending letters to anyone whose mailbox wasn't the same shade of taupe or whose trash cans were visible from the street. My neighbor George got a violation notice because his lawn gnome was visually disruptive. I tried to stay out of it. I kept my head down, paid my dues, and minded my boat. But Pamela noticed everything. One afternoon, I came home to find her standing at the edge of my dock, arms crossed, face pinched in disapproval. The sun glinted off her oversized sunglasses as she looked at my boat like it was a crime scene. "Mr. Doyle," she said, her tone sharp as glass, "we've received several complaints about your vessel." "Complaints?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "From who?" "Other residents," she said curtly. "Your boat is unsightly. It disrupts the natural view of the lake from neighboring properties." I glanced at the still water, the reflection of the boat bobbing gently. "Unsightly? It's a boat, Pamela. On a lake. It's not your lake," she snapped. "It's part of the Lakeshore Estates common property, and as HOA president, I have the authority to regulate what's stored on community docks." I tried not to laugh, but I couldn't help the smirk. "Pamela, that's my dock," she pursed her lips. "All docks extending into the lake are considered part of community access areas." I shook my head slowly. "Not this one." Pamela crossed her arms tighter. "You'll need to remove it by Friday or we'll be issuing fines." "Daily fines, Mr. Doyle. I hope you understand we take compliance very seriously." I stood there for a long moment, staring at her, this self-appointed queen of conformity, before saying, "Pamela, you might want to double-check the HOA maps before you start handing out fines." She scoffed, muttered something about troublesome residents, and stomped off in her squeaky white sneakers. As she disappeared down the path, I let out a low chuckle. Because Pamela didn't know the truth. The detail no one in the HOA had ever bothered to check. I didn't just own my house and the dock. I owned the entire lake. Years ago, before Lakeshore Estates was built, the lake had been private property belonging to a fishing lodge. When the lodge went bankrupt, I bought the land, including the lakebed, at auction. The HOA only leased water access rights from me through a vague clause in their original community charter. But Pamela? She was too busy flexing her little title to read the fine print. I took a sip from my coffee mug, looking out across the water as the afternoon light shimmered off the surface. "You're in for a surprise, Pamela," I murmured to myself. And for the first time in months, I looked forward to the next HOA meeting. By the next morning, it wasn't just Karen's shrill voice echoing across the lake. It was the full wrath of the HOA. Flyers fluttered through mailboxes like angry confetti, stamped with bold red letters. "Unauthorized watercraft notice." I found one pinned to my front door, taped so aggressively it tore the paint when I pulled it off. The fine print said I had 48 hours to remove my boat or face escalating penalties. It would have been funny if it weren't so predictably petty. The HOA logo, A little sailboat underlined by the slogan, "Preserving Lakeside Harmony," made it all the more ironic. Karen had rallied the entire board overnight. I saw them gathered at the clubhouse across the street. 5 retirees with clipboards, oversized sunglasses, and the self-importance of Supreme Court justices. They pointed, gestured, and scribbled notes while staring toward my dock like they were planning a military strike. By noon, an HOA truck rolled up. 2 young men in neon vests began taking photos of my boat from every angle, like paparazzi. I stepped outside and waved. "Need a good shot from the back, too?" I called out. One of them grinned awkwardly. The other said, "Sorry, sir, just doing our job." I nodded. Yeah, that's what they all say before they realize they're standing on private property. That got their attention. I pointed to the edge of the driveway. "Everything past that mailbox? Not HOA jurisdiction, including this dock, including that boat." The younger one hesitated. "Wait, you're saying the HOA doesn't control the lake access?" I smiled faintly. "You'll see soon enough." They packed up their cameras and left, looking uneasy. But Karen wasn't done. She went door to door around the neighborhood, spreading her gospel of HOA righteousness. I could hear snippets of her voice drifting through the open windows. "He's violating the covenant. He's setting a bad example. We can't have boats ruining our property values." That evening, I received a letter from the HOA's attorney. It claimed I was trespassing on community-owned water. That was the exact phrase that made me laugh out loud, because it meant only one thing. They had no idea who owned the lake. I poured myself a drink, sat on the edge of the dock, and watched the sun dip below the horizon. The reflection of my boat shimmered in orange and gold. To me, it wasn't just a boat. It was freedom, something the HOA could never control. The next morning, things escalated further. I woke up to find a chain-link barrier erected across the entrance to the boat ramp, with a laminated sign that read, "HOA property. No unauthorized use." Karen was standing nearby, clipboard in hand, barking orders to 2 workers. "Excuse me," I said, walking down the path. "Who approved this?" She turned, her lips twisting into that familiar smirk. "The board." "We're tired of your non-compliance, Mr. Flint." I raised an eyebrow. "You're blocking a ramp that's not yours." "According to our bylaws, the community owns all shared lake access points," she snapped. "That means no private boats unless they're HOA registered." "Then you might want to check who owns the water you're claiming," I said evenly. Her expression faltered for a split second, just enough for me to notice. "What are you implying?" "I'm implying you just built a fence on someone else's property," I replied. "And that's called trespassing." She tried to regain control. "We'll see about that." "Oh, we will," I said, turning back toward my house. "Trust me, I've got the paperwork to prove it." That night, I pulled out my deed file and scanned the original documents I'd received years ago from the county records office. Every line, every signature confirmed it. The lake was mine. Not partially, not shared. Fully deeded, legally owned. The HOA had been operating under assumption and arrogance, never once checking the actual boundary lines. And now, their mistake was about to cost them everything. By the following weekend, word had spread through the entire neighborhood. The HOA board called an emergency meeting to address what Karen described as my illegal occupation of community resources. Flyers were taped to every mailbox, and the language dripped with drama. Important HOA update. Unauthorized boat activity threatens community standards. It was ridiculous, but I attended anyway. I wanted to see how far they'd go. When I walked into the clubhouse, the chatter died instantly. A dozen neighbors turned to look, whispering behind their hands. Karen sat at the head of the table, clipboard ready, glasses low on her nose like a judge presiding over a trial. "Well," she said, voice sugar-coated with venom. "Mr. Flint, thank you for joining us. We were just discussing your continued violation of our bylaws." "Really?" I said, sitting down. "Which bylaw states you own my lake?" A murmur rippled through the room. One of the board members, an older man named Howard, cleared his throat. "We have reason to believe the lake is common property, Dakota. It's listed on our community map. I smiled thinly. Community maps are decorative. Deeds are legal. Karen's pen froze mid-tap. You can't possibly think you have ownership of the lake. Oh, I don't think, I said, leaning forward. I know, and I've got the original deed to prove it. County records confirm it's private land, purchased by me 7 years ago, before your HOA even existed. The silence was instant and heavy. Karen blinked twice, her mouth parting slightly before she regained her tone. Then we'll have our lawyer verify that. Please do, I said, standing. Just make sure he knows how to read property lines. As I turned to leave, Karen snapped, If this is a bluff, Mr. Flint, it won't end well for you. I smiled over my shoulder. Karen, the only one bluffing here is you. When I got home, I decided to go one step further. I gathered every document I had, the deed, surveys, county maps, and scanned them into a neat digital folder. Then I emailed it to the HOA's official address with a short message. Since you've chosen to harass me over my own property, here's a helpful reminder of the boundaries you've overstepped. Consider this your notice before I take legal action for trespassing and interference with private property. An hour later, my inbox pinged with a reply from Karen herself. You may think you're clever, but this isn't over. We'll be verifying your so-called ownership. Until then, the HOA expects compliance. I chuckled. Compliance. That word was her favorite. The next day, an SUV I didn't recognize parked near my dock. 2 men in suits got out, carrying clipboards and camera gear. HOA lawyers or surveyors, no doubt. I watched from my porch as they snapped photos of the ramp, the fence, even my boat. Then they walked out onto the dock, without asking permission. I grabbed my phone and took my own photos, documenting every step. By evening, I'd sent the evidence, along with a formal notice of trespass, to their lawyer's office. I wasn't bluffing anymore. When Karen showed up later that night, red-faced and fuming, she demanded to clear things up. I simply said, You built on my property, Karen. Now you're liable. Her lips pressed into a hard line. You're making a mistake. No, I said quietly. You did. She stormed off without another word. I stood by the lake listening to the soft hum of the night insects and smiled. The tide was turning, and she didn't even realize it yet. For the next week, the neighborhood turned into a quiet battleground. The HOA board went silent publicly, but behind the scenes, Karen was plotting her retaliation. I could tell every time I drove home. Her blinds would twitch, her clipboard would appear, and she'd jot something down like she was documenting an episode of CSI, Lakeview. Then came the next surprise. One morning, I woke up to the sound of engines. Heavy machinery, bulldozers and excavators, rumbling down the road toward the lake. When I stepped outside, my jaw tightened. They were setting up construction barriers near the shoreline, right where the HOA fence had gone up days earlier. A large banner read, Lakeside Improvement Project, sponsored by HOA Development Committee. Karen stood proudly in front of the equipment. Hard hat perched awkwardly on her head, sunglasses hiding her smug grin. I walked straight down to the site. Karen, I said flatly, what the hell is this? She turned, smiling like a queen surveying her kingdom. Oh, good morning, Mr. Flint. We've decided to make better use of this area. It's community property after all, and the board voted to build a shared fishing dock and recreation zone. It'll raise property values for everyone. Including your ego? I asked. She smirked. If you want to see it that way. The fact is, this area belongs to the HOA. You'll just have to live with it. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was unbelievable. You're really going to build structures on land you don't own? Her voice sharpened. You keep saying that, but you haven't proven anything. I took out my phone and opened the deed file I'd already emailed to their lawyer. Maybe you should check your inbox before you dig up someone's private property. You're not just breaking HOA rules now, you're breaking state law, Karen scoffed. You can't scare me with technicalities. Okay, I said. Don't say I didn't warn you. For the next 3 days, construction continued. Dump trucks unloaded gravel, cement mixers churned, and the sound of hammering echoed across the lake. They tore up grass, poured concrete footings, and even drove posts into the shallows. Neighbors gathered to watch. Some whispered that the HOA was going too far. Others, loyal to Karen, cheered her on, but what none of them realized was that every minute of it was being recorded by me. I'd installed trail cameras and drone footage capturing the entire project. From the first fence post to the last concrete pour. By Friday, I had hours of footage showing HOA contractors operating on my deeded property. I compiled everything into a neat timeline and sent it, along with the recorded trespass warnings, directly to the county zoning office and a local reporter I knew. The response came faster than I expected. Saturday morning, a white county truck pulled up beside the construction site. 2 inspectors stepped out, clipboards in hand. They spoke briefly with the foreman, who pointed toward Karen's house. Within minutes, Karen herself came marching out, fuming. "What's the meaning of this?" she snapped. One inspector calmly replied, "Ma'am, we received a report of unpermitted construction on privately owned land. We're here to verify ownership and legality." Karen's face went pale. "That's HOA property." "We voted on it!" The inspector flipped through his file, glanced at a printed map, and said, "Actually, according to county records, it's not." I stood nearby, arms folded, watching her world start to crumble. When the inspectors walked over to me for confirmation, I handed them my copy of the deed. "You'll find everything matches your county file?" I said. They nodded. "You're correct, Mr. Flint. This lake and surrounding area are privately owned. HOA has no jurisdiction here." Karen's jaw dropped. The construction crew froze mid-task. One of the inspectors told them to shut everything down immediately. That was the moment I knew. The HOA had just destroyed their own credibility. And Karen? She looked like someone who'd just realized she'd been caught red-handed. By Sunday morning, word had spread across Lakeview Estates like wildfire. The HOA construction site was shut down by county officials, and the community group chat was blowing up. Screenshots, memes, even GIFs of Karen arguing with the inspectors were circulating. Someone had even labeled it Karen versus County, the dock disaster. I wasn't the one who shared the footage. At least not directly. Let's just say that when a local reporter receives a juicy clip and posts it to their news page, it doesn't take long before neighbors recognize their own HOA president yelling in the background. Karen's reputation crumbled overnight. By Monday morning, the HOA office was in chaos. The once proud board members now looked like a committee of people who'd seen their dreams go up in smoke. Their phones buzzed nonstop, homeowners demanding refunds for special project fees and threatening to sue. Still, Karen wasn't ready to surrender. I got a knock on my door around noon. I opened it to find her standing there, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky, lips pressed tight like she was holding in a scream. "Dakota," she began, voice quivering with forced calm. "We need to talk." "I was wondering when you'd come by," I replied. She stepped onto my porch, ignoring the private property sign like it wasn't there. "Look, I think things got out of hand. The construction was premature, but the HOA is willing to discuss a compromise if you'll agree to—" I interrupted. "You mean if I agree to let you keep pretending you have rights over my land?" Her tone hardened. "No, I mean if you agree to avoid further escalation. You've made quite a spectacle out of this, and you're not exactly innocent either." "Innocent?" I laughed. "Karen, you tried to build a dock on my property and charge people for access. You brought in construction crews without permits. You ignored my deed and the county's warnings. And now you want me to stop escalating?" She exhaled sharply, nostrils flaring. "I'm trying to keep this civil. Civil went out the window the day you sent me that boat violation notice," I said. "You should have checked who owned the lake before playing queen of the cul-de-sac." Karen's jaw tightened, and she took a small step closer. "If you think this is over, you're mistaken. The HOA still has influence. People trust me." "Not anymore," I said quietly. "You've lost them," she didn't reply. Her expression flickered, fury, then fear. Finally, she turned and marched back down the steps, heels crunching against the gravel. After she left, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the lake shimmer in the wind. My inbox was filling up, neighbors thanking me, some apologizing for siding with her earlier. A few even asked if I'd consider running for HOA president to bring order back. The irony wasn't lost on me. Later that evening, a formal letter arrived, hand-delivered, sealed with the HOA's emblem. It was an emergency board notice, effective immediately. The HOA has suspended all lake-related activities and disbanded the fishing club pending legal clarification. Translation: they were terrified of another lawsuit, but that wasn't the end of their panic. I found out the HOA's legal fund, the same money they'd used for their fishing club and development projects, had been drained. Karen had authorized the spending without board approval. When the treasurer discovered it, she resigned on the spot and forwarded the records to the county. By Tuesday morning, half the board had quit, citing irreconcilable differences. Karen, still clinging to her position, called an emergency neighborhood meeting to restore community trust. I didn't plan to attend at first, but then I thought maybe it was time everyone finally heard the truth from the one person who actually owned the lake. And that's when things really started to unravel. The next evening, the community hall was packed. Folding chairs filled every corner, the air buzzing with gossip and tension. People were standing along the walls, phones out, recording everything. The headline from the local news page, HOA President Faces Backlash After Unauthorized Lake Project, had done its damage. Karen stood at the front behind the podium, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, face pale but composed. The HOA banner hung crooked behind her, a symbol of authority that suddenly looked flimsy. I walked in quietly, taking a seat near the middle row. Conversations hushed when people saw me. She started speaking. Neighbors, friends, I know there's been some confusion regarding the lake project. I want to clear the air and move forward together as a community. Confusion? A man from the back shouted. You built a dock on land you didn't own. The room erupted in murmurs and sarcastic laughter. Karen tried to regain control, slamming her gavel against the table. Order, please! But the crowd wasn't listening. They wanted answers. I stood up slowly. Maybe I can help clarify things. Every head turned toward me. Karen's eyes widened. She hadn't expected me to show up, much less speak. Who are you to clarify? She snapped. Dakota Flint, I said evenly. Owner of the lake property you built on. The room went silent. A few jaws dropped. Someone muttered, Wait, he owns the lake? Karen's composure faltered, but she forced a smile. Mr. Flint is exaggerating. The lake is community property under the HOA charter. I pulled out a small folder from my jacket. Actually, no. I have the original land deed here. The lake, and a 30-foot radius around it, was privately purchased years before the HOA was even established. That includes the dock area. I handed copies to a few homeowners in the front row. They passed them around. You could hear whispers ripple through the hall. An older resident near the front stood up. So you mean to tell us Karen's been using HOA funds to build on private land? Karen's face turned crimson. That's an outrageous accusation. The board approved. The board didn't even know, another member interrupted. You signed off on it yourself. You hid the expense under community improvements? The room exploded again, shouting, accusations, disbelief. People who once nodded politely at Karen in morning jogs were now standing up, yelling about dues, fines, and threats. Karen raised her hands, desperate. Please, everyone calm down. But I wasn't done. Let's talk about the fishing club, too, I said. They've been charging members for access to a lake they don't even have rights to. Guess where those membership fees went? All eyes snapped back to her. A man from the second row yelled, You took our money for a fake club? It wasn't fake, she yelled back, voice breaking. It was a community initiative. A woman near the back folded her arms. A community initiative that paid for your dock and your friend's landscaping business. Karen's expression collapsed. She looked around, realizing the crowd had turned completely against her. I stepped forward, my voice calm but firm. Karen, you didn't just cross a line. You built an empire on top of my property, ignored every warning, and tried to intimidate me. But the thing about power is, when it's built on lies, it falls apart fast. Her gavel slipped from her hand and clattered onto the floor. The sound echoed through the hall. One of the board members, a tall man in a gray suit, stood up and said, I motioned to remove Karen as HOA president effective immediately. The hall erupted in applause. Dozens of hands went up, seconding the motion. It was over before Karen could even protest. She looked around the room, trembling, eyes glassy. Then she stormed off the stage, pushing past the reporters waiting at the back door. I stayed behind as people came up to thank me, shake my hand, and apologize for believing her lies. For the first time in months, the tension around Lakeview Estates broke like a dam. As I left the hall, the night air felt cool, calm, peaceful, and finally, the lake felt like mine again. A week after the meeting, the neighborhood felt like an entirely different place. The angry notes that used to appear on my porch were gone, replaced with quiet nods from passing neighbors. The lake, once fenced off by Karen's ridiculous members-only sign, was open again and shimmering under the afternoon sun like nothing had ever disturbed it. I stood on the dock that she'd built, now legally mine, watching ripples spread across the water. It felt poetic. Her symbol of control had become a reminder of her downfall. The HOA had been restructured, the new board filled with people who actually listened, who wanted peace instead of power. A car pulled up behind me. I turned to see James, one of the former board members who'd resigned when Karen's lies came to light. He stepped out with a sheepish grin. "Guess the lake looks better without her banners hanging everywhere," I chuckled. "And without her fines for unauthorized reflections on the water, yeah," he laughed. "She's still trying to file an appeal, you know. Claims the HOA should have had partial ownership of the property?" I shrugged. "She can try, but the deed's bulletproof. The county records confirmed everything. She built her kingdom on assumption and lost it the moment truth showed up." James nodded, looking out over the lake. "Funny how fast people turn when the truth hits them." "Yeah," I said quietly. "But it's not revenge that satisfies you in the end. It's peace." A soft breeze rolled over the water. I could hear kids playing in the distance, their laughter echoing across the shore. The sound used to annoy me when all this began. But now it felt like the heartbeat of a community finally free from fear. For months, Karen had made this place feel small, tense, divided. She ruled through fines, threats, and gossip. And I'd spent those same months thinking about ways to fight back without sinking to her level. Turns out, I didn't need to destroy her, just expose her truth and let her own arrogance do the rest. Before leaving, I reached into my jacket and pulled out the small notice of violation she'd once taped to my door for unsightly water equipment. I smiled, folded it neatly, and set it down on the dock railing. A souvenir, a reminder that sometimes justice isn't loud or cruel. Sometimes it's quiet and satisfying, like the soft sound of waves lapping against the shore. As I walked back to my truck, I caught a glimpse of the new HOA banner fluttering gently near the entrance. It read, "Lakeview Estates, a community united." Maybe now it finally was. And as I started the engine and drove away, I couldn't help but grin. Karen had tried to own the lake through power. But I had something she never understood. Ownership through patience, proof, and persistence. This time, the water reflected peace, not control. If this story left you smiling, don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe for more HOA revenge tales. Drop a comment about what you'd have done in my place. I love reading your thoughts. Sometimes the sweetest justice isn't loud. It's calm, smart, and absolutely undeniable.